Welcome to another episode of Austin Tech Connect. This is the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council. My name is Thom Singers, and I've now been with ATC for 3 years. And 2.5 years ago, we started this podcast so we could interview interesting people in Austin who are doing cool things. And today, we are joined by an old friend of mine. In fact, he got to Austin in 1992, which means I beat him here by a year. But we got to witness everything that happened in the 90s and the 2000s here in tech. And I've known him all this time. His name is Sam Goodner. Sam, welcome to the show.
Tom, so good to be with you.
So for those of you who don't know Sam, and if you've been around Austin for a long time, you probably should know him. He was the founder of a couple of companies, and the one he's probably best known for was Catapult Systems. I met Sam when he was running Catapult Systems back in the 90s. But he was actually born in Texas, but at 1 year old, his parents said, hey, let's get out of here. And they moved to Europe. And when he was a young man, he actually served in the special forces for the Swiss Army. We'll talk a little bit about that. Came back to Austin in 92, became an entrepreneur, and now he is a temporarily retired entrepreneur. You know, he told me in the pre-thing he was a retired entrepreneur. I thought, yeah, I'll believe that when I see it. But he's been working on a book, so once the book is launched, I bet he goes back and starts another company or does something like that because he's always been involved. He's an angel investor. He's been a mentor for over a decade at Capital Factory, and he's just an all-around nice guy that you want to know if you're here in Austin Tech. And he just released this week a new book called Like Clockwork, Run Your Business with Swiss Army Precision. So, Sam, before we talk about the book, let's go into the Wayback Machine. All right, so you grew up in Europe. Let's talk a little bit about that. What did you do education-wise? How did you end up in the Swiss Guard, et cetera?
So, again, I didn't have a choice. My parents moved me to Europe when I was 1. My sister was born there. And my parents decided that's where they wanted to raise their family. So they became Swiss. They renounced their U.S. citizenship. My sister and I became Swiss citizens as well. We went to all the local schools. And for all Swiss men, after high school, we have compulsory military service. We all serve. And so after high school, I served in the Swiss military for a year before going to college, another year after that. And so it was just kind of part of my DNA. I didn't even know any different at the time. It's only with some hindsight that I realized, man, a lot of the things I learned during that time serving in our special forces, I later applied at the various companies I ran over the following 30 years.
Interesting. So you get to Austin and you become an entrepreneur. Let's talk a little bit about the two companies that you ran.
Yeah. Well, first of all, when I moved to Austin, I needed a job. So I went to work for about 1.5 years for Dell Computer Corporation, that little company up, in Round Rock. You've heard of them before. And I started my first business with 2 co-founding partners in 1993. We originally set off to build a software product company, but we didn't have any money. And this is the early 90s before venture capital firms were throwing bags of money at, enterprising young entrepreneurs like us. So we needed to figure out a way to generate cash flow to self-fund some of these different product ideas that we had. And so we thought, well, we know a lot about this new technology called client server. I bet companies would pay us to help them figure that out too. So it accidentally became an IT consulting firm. All along, the idea though was let's self-fund these different these software product companies that we're thinking about. And we did that. Along the way, we created a product called PowerDoc, Advanced Power Tools. Then our flagship product, Inquisite, was released in 1997. It was a big success, became its own company, had a successful exit 10 years later. But all along, suddenly we looked around and we had built this successful IT consulting firm that we're like, well, let's continue growing that as well. And at one point, it was a 20-year journey for me. We became the #1 Microsoft integrator actually in the world. We were ranked by Microsoft, the #1 partner in the world, several years in a row, before I sold that business to a public company in 2013. And then I retired for the first time, took the kids out of school, traveled around the world for a year with the whole family, homeschooled them. And, that was kind of the experience.
Nice. Well, I can't imagine homeschooling kids while traveling, although There's a lot of people who like to do that, but I kind of like shipping them off to school every day when my kids were little. But I know your kids are now college students. I will tell everybody who will listen, the best part of parenthood is adult children who are out of college and pay their own way in the world with significant others who you adore. Because we like my son-in-law, we like the young man who the younger daughter is with, and so I feel like, wow, we did well because we like them all, and they don't ask us for money anymore.
I'm looking forward to the time I'm not the piggy bank.
Yes, that's exactly right. So your retirement lasted like 2 years. Then what did you do?
So then I came back to Austin, and I knew I wasn't ready to retire. I also knew I didn't want to start a company from scratch again, and I had more capital at this point. So I started looking for a company to buy or invest in, but one that I could join full time and help scale. So I became an angel investor and started looking at companies that needed growth capital. And it took longer than I thought. It took me about a year. I must have looked at least 100 startups during the course of that year. And then I meet this young founder called Juan Rodriguez, and he had started this company in, of all things, the antiquated parking technology space. And he had built this revolutionary platform, but he was stuck. He had to hit a plateau. And what he needed was some growth capital and maybe some gray hair, and I could provide both. So I invested with a friend of mine. We took down the whole round he was looking to raise. I put myself on the executive team as president, and then we proceeded to scale that business like crazy. We grew the first 2.5 years, we grew that business 10x. Then we went and raised a whole bunch of other money. Now that business is well over 150 million in revenue. The last round of funding that we did was at a unicorn valuation, which was sort of kind of fun. And then 2 years ago, my daughter graduates from high school. I become an empty nester and decide it's time for that company to continue on without me and for me to move on and go find something else to do. I'd always wanted to write this book. In fact, I've been keeping notes on this book for 25 years. And I'm like, this is a great opportunity for me to retire, send my daughter my youngest off to college, and take some time to go write that book, which I did.
Nice. So let's talk about the book. It just came out this week, and it is called Like Clockwork, Run Your Business with Swiss Army Precision. Now, obviously, we know you spent some time in the Swiss Army, but let's talk about why is that the title of the book, and why does the Swiss Army do this well?
Yeah. Well, one, I wanted to find a theme that was unique. And certainly I'd never seen any business book that was inspired by the Swiss military. We have a lot of books inspired by Navy SEALs and Marines and Air Force, and but none from sort of my vantage point. And I'll start with a sports analogy. We all love our sports. I think it'll give some backdrop to the reason why I wrote the book. We love our sports, but we tend to focus on the outcomes, which means we love the touchdown, we love the home run, we love the slam dunk, we love the world record. But what we fail to see or appreciate is the years and decades of hard work, training, and discipline that went into each one of the athletes to get them to that elite level to have that winning outcome. And the same is true in business. We love to celebrate the big product launch, the IPO, we even like to celebrate the billionaire lifestyles of some of the founders. And so we see all of these outcomes, and we often fail to really appreciate all of the disciplined execution that went into building that business that allowed it to have, that rocket land vertical, or the release of the brand new iPhone. And so I wanted to focus my book on that, right? Operational discipline. In fact, my favorite quote, you've probably read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear.
I have.
Everybody has. One of my favorite books, one of the only books I actually made my kids read. One of my favorite quotes from James Clear is, "You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems." And the same thing is true in business. Every business aspires to be successful, but not every business has that operational discipline to get past that plateau where the entrepreneur is in the middle of everything. It's, I see a lot of startups, and it's this hero journey of the entrepreneur and the co-founders and a small team. And as long as you're this small team, everybody knows how to do everything. Everybody can finish each other's sentences. And, you don't need any systems in place to, to scale to, to scale to 5-7 people. But then once you hit that plateau, you need to figure out how to implement what I call operational scalability. Now, operational scalability is the ability to put in place the right people and the right systems so that your business can not only run, but scale without the founder in the middle of every decision. So that's what the book focuses on.
So I love that term, operational scalability. And there's so many things that you just said I want to go back and cover a little bit. But let's talk about what is operational scalability. And obviously it makes sense from the way you just described it. But where's the lesson in that for everybody who's listening to this? Where's the lesson for every business?
Well, the lesson for every business is it's something you're going to have to figure out if you want to scale past a certain size, where, again, the founder is on this 19-hour-a-day hero journey in the middle of everything. So, for example, when I sit down with young entrepreneurs at Capital Factory, you mentioned I'm a mentor there. I love that organization, love being a mentor with them. And oftentimes they'll say, listen, hey, Sam, I just raised this seed round of funding, and I want to scale, and I want to go hire salespeople. How do I do that? And I usually will go, well, okay, let's take a step back. Let's make sure you're ready before you go just hire a bunch of salespeople. And I'll ask them a bunch of questions. And usually my first question is, tell me what you're best in the world at. And they usually are a little taken aback and they go, well, I don't know, that's a tall order. I'm like, okay, well, how are you different than everyone else in your industry? And what I really want to know is, what is your unfair advantage over everyone else that's going to allow you to just rocket ship to the next level? And so until they have a crystal answer for that, they're actually probably not ready to scale, because they could scale in the wrong direction. And then once they figure out that answer, and by the way, best in the world, I know it sounds like a tall order, but you're familiar with, for example, right here in Austin, Swedish Hill Bakery.
Love me some cookies at Swedish Hill Bakery.
I contend that Swedish Hill Bakery is best in the world at being a bakery in Clarksville, Texas. Now, that's their world. And their unfair advantage is a combination of their location, probably some of their recipes, and their oven, and they kill it. But for your business, for your industry, whatever it is, you have to have an answer to that question if you want to be able to scale. So then, what is the first thing you typically need to look at? Well, the first thing you need to look at for sales is sales, right? You have to grow revenue before you grow in any other part of your business. You have to figure that out. And most entrepreneurs that want to grow sales, for example, they just want to go hire a bunch of salespeople and say, good luck. And that's never the right answer. So before they go and hire a salesperson or a sales team, I sit down with them and say, listen, we need to codify that part of your business, right? But back to that operational discipline. We need to codify that part of your business. We need to create a sales playbook, because you've been out there as the founder selling your product or service, and you've had to learn the hard way what works, what doesn't work, who's my target audience, not just the company, the industry, the size, the geography, but who inside that company is the decision maker? How do you get in front of them? Can you call them? Can you email them? Do you have to wait for them in the lobby to come out to get in front of them? Like, what's worked, what's not? What objections are you going to hear? And how do you overcome those objections? And so you put all of this in what I call a sales playbook. You have to codify that long before you're ready to go hire anybody. But then when you hire that star salesperson, you say, here's the sales playbook. Here's who we're going after, target market. Here's the persona at that company. Here are the objections. Here's how we're going to get in front of them. Here's the following email, the second email. Here's what the proposal looks like. Then you're ready to go scale that part of your business.
So it's interesting because so many of these founders, and you and I have been friends with hundreds of them over the years, they're sort of the Lone Ranger. They like that. Their self-identity gets wrapped up in the fact that they're closing the deals, they're doing this, they're doing the development, they're doing this. How do you get leaders in these startups to be able to put up the wall and say, I am not my role in the business, and the business is not me?
Man, I'm so glad you asked that question. I literally have an entire chapter entitled Decentralized Decision Making. The whole point there is, and by the way, I had to learn this the hard way. I'll tell you the story if you want, because I wasn't always good at this.
Oh, yeah. I love it when people talk about their failures. Please tell us the story.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you the story. So, like a lot of young founders, I had no idea how to run a business, right? I've learned by making every mistake in the book. And I didn't even realize this. I thought I hired great people. We were very successful in the 90s all the way through, the early 2000s before the dot-com crash. And I thought I was doing pretty well. What I didn't realize is I was in the middle of every business decision in the company. I didn't even know it. I'd never taken more than 2 days off from the company, and that was 7 years in. And then my father, who lived in Munich back then, calls me and tells me he has cancer and the doctors have given him 6 months to live. So I do what every son would do. I go to my executive team and I say, listen, guys, I'm going to go to Germany. I don't know how long I'm gone, at least a month. You guys are in charge, but you're not going to be able to reach me. And they're like, well, how are we going to make decisions? I'm like, well, you will figure it out. So I go to Germany, spend that amazing time with my father. By the way, cancer would eventually take his life, but not until 8 years later. So we had more time with him than we thought. When I came back a month and a half later, the company wasn't just running, it was running better than when I left. I came back and it was beautifully right. It was running beautifully. And what had happened is suddenly everybody had to step up, take ownership of the decisions that they made, actually make the decision. They had their own ideas, their own creativity. It leveled everyone up, and all of their direct reports leveled up as a result. Now, again, I quickly patted myself on the back and said and told myself, well, after all, I hired that team, so it was really, responsible for it. But that's when I realized, oh my goodness, I've already hired the best people, but I've not gotten out of their kitchen. And so that whole chapter is about, there's a chapter on how to hire the best people. When you hire the right person and you put them in charge of a part of your business, then your job as the founder is to get out of the way. Now, you still get to set the overall direction of the company, the overall vision, the overall culture. You have really big responsibility. But in terms of running each business unit that you've now created, your job is to put the right person at the helm and then get out of the way. And you're right. Some entrepreneurs have a really hard time letting go of that. And very few of them manage to scale past a certain point.
The other thing is, in both of the companies we talked about that you were involved with, it reached a point where you walked away. You sold Catapult Systems, yep. And then you stepped out of the growing parking industry company when you got to a certain point. A lot of entrepreneurs can't do that. Why do you have the ability to say, I got it to this level and now I'm going to go do something new? In fact, I only know a handful of entrepreneurs who've chosen to leave when things are good. I've seen some pushed out by private equity investors or their board when things aren't good. But you're one of a handful I know that are like, things are rocking, it's time for me to leave.
Well, again, it is all about operational scalability and putting the right people in place. And if you put the right people in place, then at some point you obsolete yourself. Again, I could have made up a role for me as, founder emeritus, chairman of this or that. But when you hire the right people, give them the right lanes, the right swim lanes, empower them to make the right decisions, then at some point, the natural next, at least as far as I'm concerned, the natural next evolution for you is to move on and go help another company.
So in the book, you've got 30 chapters, and
Yes.
I have not read the book yet because it just was released like yesterday. But there's 30 case studies in there within the chapters, and many of them, I don't know if all of them, but many of them are Austin-based case studies. So who are some of the companies you use as these positive examples of how to run your business with the precision of the Swiss Army?
Yeah, man. So many great companies and founders that were generous enough to share their stories with me. Um, my very first chapter is about how to create an amazing first day, first week, first month experience for new employees. It's entitled First Day. My case study in that book is, you know him very well. It's Randy Cohen, the founder of Ticket City. And as you can imagine, he created this amazing party for every time they hired a new employee. So he's one of my case studies.
Well, wait, I want to touch on that for a minute because
yeah.
I never worked for Randy, but I've known Randy about as long as I've known you, back to the 90s. And I will say that everything is a party when you're around Randy. And so I can't imagine how amazing it must have been to go to work there. And every study that I've read, and one of the things that I teach when I speak about sort of human interaction, is all the studies show that when someone has a great first day, they stay longer, work harder, and are more satisfied in their job. And what's interesting is so often on the first day, nobody takes them to lunch. People are busy. They don't want to bother them because they're doing their HR stuff. And they go home and their spouse says, "How was your day?" And they're like, "I don't know. I was in my cube filling out paperwork all day." I can only imagine with Randy that, you probably did your HR work the second day because it was a party.
You are so right. So, and everything you said about First Day, I think it's intuitive to you, but you'd be surprised how many companies botch that. You, of course, remember the scooter store just down the street in New Braunfels. Doug Harrison was very generous with his time, and we have a phenomenal case study with him. If you've heard of Stephen Shang and Falcon Storage, of course, everybody knows Deep Eddy, right? Deep Eddy vodka. So my good friend Clayton Christopher volunteered, to share some of his stories there. In fact, his story is about creating that sales playbook I was telling you about. When they were growing Deep Eddy, they realized that one of the ways that they needed to get the product known, that if people tried it, especially when they came out with Ruby Red vodka, if people
which is my favorite flavor of
it's my favorite too. If you could just get people to try it, they would become avid, avid customers. And one of the ways they did that is they realized, well, music festivals are a great way for this. And so they hired what are called brand ambassadors to go help promote their product at music festivals and other openings, store openings and things like that. And this is a combination of full-time and part-time employees. And they wanted all of their brand ambassadors to sort of look a certain way. So they kind of all look like their label. They have they have Betty, who's dipping her toe in Deep Eddy pool here, and so the playbook that they put together went to every detail in terms of, please explain, the distillation process and how the natural ingredients are different than anybody else, and the water that we use, and the culture behind the company, and all the way down to how they had to dress and do their makeup and do their hair. And it was so remarkably consistent. They had this amazing sort of brand that they perpetuated from festival to festival. Well, and of course, the rest of the success. So, to name only a few companies, but you've heard of so many others, right? So one of my other favorites, and this is towards the end, of course, you've heard of Build a Sign.
Of course. One
of our local favorites, right? Dan Graham, also a close friend of mine. This is my chapter on giving back. Because at some point, you're successful enough as a company that it's time to put in place some real programs to give back to the community that's given so much to you. And how do you do that in a way that's really engaging for all of your employees? And at Build a Sign, they had this remarkable program that grew organically, where they do welcome home signs for military families that are welcoming troops coming home from overseas. And if you're a military family, that sign is free. Well, they initially were doing it as a promotion. And they said the first 10,000 signs we'll do for free. And the first 10,000 signs were accounted for in a week and a half or 2 weeks. And they realized, you know what? We've hit on something special. We're going to just make this a permanent part of our company culture. For all military families, your banners are free. And the last time they checked, it was well over 500,000 of these banners, maybe even more by now. And then there's a part of this I have a hard time sharing without tearing up. And And then what they noticed is some of the families would call in because they'd place these orders months in advance because they knew when their loved one was coming home from overseas. And sometimes they had to call in and cancel the order because their loved one had died. And rather than just cancel the order, they employed a lot of veterans in their warehouse at BuildASign. And rather than just cancel the order, the veterans got together, took the initiative on their own, and they would put together a different kind of sign, a funeral sort of, sign and flowers. And they would go through this almost flag folding like ceremony privately, just them inside the warehouse, before shipping it to the family. Again, I get teared up thinking about it, but it became such a powerful component of their culture of giving back. It still permeates that company today. So that's one of the examples in my book that I love the most.
Nice. Now, as you drop a lot of the names of who these people are, I of course know a lot of them because I've been in Austin since the early 90s. A lot of them are your friends from your time that you spent in EO. And
EO, YPO, other friends, you bet.
So EO, YPO, different organizations that have touched our community, and I'll throw in Austin Technology Council and others that have been here for these growing entrepreneurs. Why is it important for a growth-oriented entrepreneur who wants to scale their company to be involved with things like, Capital Factory, the Chamber of Commerce, the Austin Technology Council, EO, YPO? I mean, the list is long. Why should they be involved with, you can't be involved with everything, but one or two or three of these different organizations over their career?
Well, first of all, let me plug the Austin Technology Council. Catapult Systems was always a member, and so was our product company, Inquisite. I'm a huge fan of the Austin Technology Council. I went to most of the events back in the day. Why is it important? Well, we don't exist on an island. We exist as part of a broader community. And so being able to understand, that community and how you might be able to work with them, being able to understand, and then when you think of organizations like especially EO and YPO, but also, Austin Technology Council, to be able to exchange ideas with other entrepreneurs and CEOs and learn from some of their mistakes. They're probably facing all the same problems you're facing. Can't find talent, or this recession, we're in the middle of this, or, suddenly the COVID, that. It's lonely at the helm of these companies. And so being able to have this community of peers through whatever organization you're a part of is invaluable to learn. Everything I know about running a company, I've learned from these organizations of peers. They've been my MBA in how to run a business.
Well, my personal tagline is community, collaboration, and conversations can solve all problems. And I worry, as we're getting to be more technical of a technology-driven society, I call it an AI-driven world, I'm a big fan of tech. I've grown up around tech. I've lived here in Austin and watched the whole tech boom happen. I now run the Austin Technology Council. Yay, technology. But sometimes we have to remember that technology is a tool. And no matter what it is, it's there to enhance the way we do work, the way we run our lives and our families. But at the end, all opportunities in life are going to come from people. And I think we need to educate that next generation that they have to have something where they're interacting with other people. Because when you throw a bunch of really smart CEOs from a lot of different types of tech companies together, community problems get solved and the companies do better.
I could not agree with you more. In fact, as you mentioned, both of my kids are in college, and both of my kids, and frankly, all of their friends that I've met with, and they're all kind of terrified about hitting the job market in a world. In a world where AI is suddenly becoming ubiquitous and threatening to take a lot of, certain kinds of jobs. And they have really mixed feelings about it. And what I keep telling them is two things. Number one, embrace AI. Yep. And I would be thrilled to be graduating from college right now, because this is, of course, the biggest technology inflection point that you and I have ever seen in our lifetime, or frankly, in the history of humanity. So if you don't embrace it, if you don't use it every day, you're going to be left behind. So graduate from college as an AI native. Yep. Right? So one, embrace it. Two, in a world of AI where it's permeating everything, one of the most valuable currencies is human relationships. One of the most valuable currencies in the world of AI is human relationships. And if you lean into that, you're going to do really well, because human beings want to do business with other human beings, right? Companies don't do business with companies. It's human being to human being. They don't want to buy from an AI bot. They like to help build a relationship with another human being. The examples are infinite, but that's the new currency, is human relationships.
Well, and recently, 4 or 5 months ago, I spoke at a conference at MIT to 50 successful entrepreneurs, one of which was you. And my message was human interaction in an AI-driven world. And it was really interesting because I still hear from people who I didn't know. I knew 3 or 4 of the people in the audience, but I still hear from people when they have a human interaction or they tell their kid something about what I call HI, for human interaction in the AI-driven world. And it was so interesting because a lot of these people, a lot of them know Richard Branson. I mean, these people were running in a class higher than I usually run in. And some of them are still texting me talking about, here's another tip for your speech and things like that. So even when you're the most successful people, you've been running businesses, you're in your 50s, you're a multimillionaire, a lot of these people, it resonated with them. And they said, this is a message that matters. So it was very interesting, though. You were one of the people in that audience. You're also one of the first people to ever hire me. I think you might have paid me $500, but you're one of the first people to ever hire me to give a speech back in the mid-90s, long before I was ever legit as a speaker. I always remember I spoke to the team.
You told me that was your first paying client.
It might have been my first paying client. That's right. I did speak the other day for the Westlake Chamber of Commerce at their 30-year anniversary, and they found a flyer from about that same era of 1997. And I told them that was probably one of the first speeches I ever gave. That being said, they didn't pay me. So you probably are the first paying client for that $500. So thank you.
My pleasure.
So as we look at Austin, right, you and I have been here over 3 decades. A lot of things have changed, and people complain about change. I think change is just something that happens. I grew up in Los Angeles in the 70s, and Los Angeles doubled in size during that time. I lived in San Diego in the 80s. San Diego, went up 50% of population during the late 80s. So all I've ever known is towns that were booming. So it doesn't shock me that we've gone from 700,000 to 2.5 million people in the 34 years I've been here. But we've done some things very well. However, sometimes I worry we're just becoming another big city. And so I always like to ask people on the show, what do you think as a tech ecosystem and as a city, Austin's doing well in our current situation? What do you think maybe we're not doing as well, and what does the future look like?
Yeah. Austin is this really interesting bubble in that we're a blue county inside of a conservative red state.
Well, not since the gerrymandering where everybody's a red county.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Still, because of the University of Texas that's here, and I think the population that Austin generally attracts, and probably because of an influx from, East Coast, West Coast, big cities, we're a very business-friendly state, right? No state income tax, the regulations very pro-business. I could give you a million reasons why Texas is just an amazing state to do business in. And yet, you get this very sort of liberal, still environmentally friendly and focused, local government that is focused, that still works hard to keep our parks available to everyone and not overbuild, beyond a certain size, this side of the river and everything else. So I think Austin is, that continued focus on quality of life. I mean, you've been to Houston, you've been to Dallas, and those are amazing cities, but I wouldn't want to live there. I love living in Austin. I love what we have. Now, and the good part of growing is, and now we have a lot more stuff, better restaurants, better art, better entertainment, better everything. Obviously, our infrastructure is lagging. It always does, right? So traffic gets bad at certain times of day, and everybody complains about that, and we're overtaxing some of our resources, and all those things are true. But I think pound for pound, Austin is still one of the best places to not only work, but do business. Even if our cost of living is sort of, creeped up because of all this influx from, California and New York. We've taken a big correction, obviously, in the last couple of years, but it's still a very, compared to California, still a very cost-effective place to live.
So what do you think the future holds for Austin?
I'm bullish. I'm a big fan.
Me too.
Yeah.
So, Sam, as we wrap this up, any final words for people who are listening?
Man, again, Austin Technology Council, if you're not a member right now and you're running a technology company, you should become a member. There's no question.
And I didn't pay him for that. That was good.
No, you're welcome.
He wants his $500 back now. No, I'm just kidding.
I did. With interest. No, listen, it's been a pleasure. It's so good to see you, Thom. I always love running into you, and thanks for having me on the show.
Awesome. Well, and I wish you lots of luck with the book. You can probably get it on Amazon and other places that you get books. I understand there's an audio version as well.
It is in my voice. I apologize in advance. I had to read it. But yes, like Clockwork, run your business with Swiss Army Precision on Amazon, available today.
Just Google Sam Goodner's book. I bet it shows up that way as well. So thank you very much for being a guest on the show. Thanks for everybody who tuned in and listened. You know, we've been doing this show for 2.5 years, but we do it because of the audience, and we need to grow the audience, much like we need to grow the Austin Technology Council. So if you're listening and you've listened to this far, 35 minutes in, please make sure that you're sharing this podcast with all your friends and trying to get your company to support our cause and what we're trying to do. We'll be back next week with another interview with somebody just as fascinating as Sam Goodner. You're thinking, Thom, how will you ever find somebody as fascinating? But we will, I promise. We'll be back next week. Thanks again, and we'll see you.